Hey guys, medieval bathing is often imagined as a simple story of dirt, ignorance, and people who did not care about being clean. But the stranger truth is that many people did care. They washed more often than the myth suggests, worried about smell, respected certain forms of cleanliness, and still found full bathing difficult, expensive, inconvenient, or even suspicious in ways that made sense in their world. Before we step into that world, let me know where you're watching from and what quiet corner of history you'd like to hear next. If you enjoy thoughtful, long-form history told calmly, liking the video is a simple way to support it. And if you'd like more quietly fascinating history to settle into, you're very welcome to subscribe. So let's begin not with a grand castle or a battlefield, but with water. In the modern home, water arrives so quietly that we almost forget it is there. It comes through pipes hidden in walls, warmed by systems most of us never see, drained away without ceremony. To wash, we turn a handle. To bathe, we fill a tub. To clean a floor, a shirt, a cup, or a child's face, we use water as if it has no weight, no distance, and no labor behind it. In much of medieval Europe, water had weight. It had to be carried. It had to be drawn from a well, collected from a stream, hauled from a spring, or taken from a public fountain if the town was fortunate enough to have one. Came in buckets, not pipes. Came by hand, not pressure. And every pail of it represented effort before the washing even began. This is the first thing modern viewers often misunderstand about medieval bathing. The difficulty was not simply that people lacked the idea of cleanliness. The difficulty was that cleanliness belonged to a world of limits. Water was heavy, fuel was costly, privacy was scarce, houses were cramped, soap was useful but not always cheap. And the human body was understood through beliefs about health that were very different from ours. A bath in that setting was not just a pleasant personal routine. It was a small domestic project. For an ordinary household, especially in the countryside, preparing a full bath could mean drawing water again and again, carrying it into the house, heating it over a fire, pouring it into a wooden tub, trying to keep the room warm enough, and then dealing with the used water afterward. The bath itself might last minutes, but the work around it could take far longer. And if several people were to bathe, the labor multiplied. Even the fire mattered. Fuel was not an invisible utility. Wood had to be gathered, cut, bought, stored, dried, guarded, and rationed. In some areas, access to good firewood could be limited by local rights or land ownership. In towns, fuel was often purchased. In poorer homes, every extra flame had to justify itself. Fire cooked food, warmed rooms, dried clothes, heated water, and sometimes kept illness or dampness at bay. Using a large amount of it for bathing was not always impossible, but it was rarely casual. This is why medieval washing often happened in smaller, more practical forms. Hands were washed, faces were rinsed, hair might be combed, covered, scented, or occasionally washed depending on place, status, and circumstance. Feet could be washed, especially in religious, domestic, or hospitality settings. Linen was valued because it touched the body and could absorb sweat and oils. Changing or washing linen could be a form of bodily cleanliness, even when full immersion was uncommon. To modern ears, that may sound like a poor substitute, but in medieval logic, it was not meaningless. A clean shift or undergarment could make a real difference. Linen worn beneath outer clothing protected heavier garments from the body. Since woolen outerwear was harder to wash and slower to dry, linen became part of the cleaning system. It carried away some of the dirt of daily life, and when it was washed, boiled, beaten, dried, and aired, it helped maintain a kind of cleanliness suited to the materials of the time. This does not mean medieval people were spotless. They lived close to smoke, animals, mud, sweat, food scraps, straw, dung, tallow, and damp cloth. Streets could smell strongly. Rooms could trap odors. Beds could hold pests. Work could leave the body grimy by noon. But it does mean the simple image of people proudly refusing to wash is misleading. The truth is more interesting. They wanted cleanliness, but they pursued it through routines shaped by work, weather, class, religion, medicine, and access. In towns, the story becomes even more layered, because medieval Europe did have public bathhouses. This surprises many people. Across parts of medieval urban life, especially from the 12th to the 15th centuries, public bathhouses could be common enough to appear in records, moral complaints, regulations, and everyday urban culture. They were places where hot water, steam, food, conversation, grooming, and sometimes medical treatments came together. Some were respectable. Some were questionable. Some were both, depending on who was speaking. A medieval bathhouse was not exactly a modern spa, though it might share a few distant echoes. It could offer wooden tubs, heated rooms, attendants, cloths, oils, herbs, and food or drink. People might go to bathe, sweat, shave, be cupped, be treated for minor ailments, or simply enjoy warmth and company. For someone who lived in a cold, smoky, crowded house, the attraction is not hard to understand. A hot bath was comfort. It was sensation. It was relief. And here we reach one of the first quiet contradictions of medieval bathing. Public baths existed, and yet bathing could still be rare for many people. The reason is that availability is not the same as daily habit. A town might have bathhouses, but not everyone could afford them regularly. A village might have streams and wells, but not heated private bathing. A noble household might have tubs, servants, linen, and scented water, but not necessarily modern habits of daily washing. A monastery might emphasize ritual cleanliness in one setting and bodily restraint in another. Across medieval society, washing was not absent. It was uneven. Class mattered enormously. For the wealthy, bathing could be arranged. Servants carried water. Fires were maintained. Large tubs could be brought out or set in private chambers. Fine linen, herbs, rosewater, or scented preparations might be available. Noble households sometimes took bathing seriously as comfort, hospitality, preparation, or ceremony. A guest could be offered water to wash. A bride might be prepared with care. A lord or lady could enjoy forms of cleanliness that depended not only on money, but on other people's labor. For the poor, the same act looked different. A peasant family did not simply decide to have a relaxing hot bath at the end of a hard day. The day itself may have been spent carrying, chopping, cooking, tending animals, mending, spinning, brewing, hauling, washing clothes, or working in fields. The body was tired before the bath began. The water had to be fetched. The fuel had to be spared. The tub, if available, had to be filled. The house had to be warm enough. The floor had to survive spills. And afterward, the dirty water had to be carried out. So washing often became targeted. The parts that showed, the parts that smelled, the parts used for eating, prayer, work, or greeting others. Hands mattered because eating was often done with the fingers, even when knives, spoons, and shared vessels were present. Clean hands were not a modern invention. Medieval manners texts and household customs could place real emphasis on washing before meals. In higher status homes, water might be brought for guests to rinse their hands. Cleanliness and courtesy were linked. The face mattered too. So did hair, though hair care could be complicated. Covered hair, veils, caps, coifs, and hoods helped manage cleanliness, as well as modesty and social identity. Combing removed debris and lice. Oils or scented substances might be used by those who could afford them. Some people washed hair, but drying long hair in a cold, smoky room was not always simple. Wet hair could be uncomfortable, slow to dry, and, according to many medical beliefs of the period, potentially risky if it chilled the body. That fear of chilling is important. Medieval ideas about health did not separate washing from the balance of the body. Many people understood illness through humoral theory, inherited from ancient medicine and reshaped through medieval learning. The body was thought to be affected by heat, cold, moisture, dryness, diet, season, age, temperament, air, and the opening or closing of pores. A hot bath might be beneficial in one situation and dangerous in another. Could relax, cleanse, and soften the body, but it could also be thought to weaken, open the body to harmful air, or disturb balance if used carelessly. This is one reason medieval bathing was surrounded by advice, caution, and timing. A bath might be recommended before certain treatments, after travel, before a feast, or as part of medical care. But it might also be discouraged during illness, after eating too much, in cold weather, or at times when the body was believed to be vulnerable. To modern viewers, this can sound confused. But within the medical framework of the time, it had an internal logic. And that is where a more trustworthy history has to slow down. It is easy to laugh at the past for not knowing about germs in the modern sense. But medieval people were not simply stupid because they lived before bacteriology. They observed patterns with the tools they had. They noticed that cold, dampness, foul air, exhaustion, and bad water could be associated with sickness. They built explanations around balance, corruption, and vulnerability. Some of those explanations were wrong. Some practices were ineffective. But many concerns came from real experience, filtered through a different understanding of the body. Bathing also had a moral and social reputation that changed over time. Public bathhouses could make authorities nervous. Not because washing itself was always condemned, but because bathhouses gathered bodies, privacy, warmth, drink, leisure, and sometimes sexual activity in one place. Moralists complained. City officials regulated. Religious writers warned against excess, vanity, or temptation. Over time, especially as disease fears, moral suspicion, and changing urban conditions intensified, public bathing could become less respectable in some regions. This is another place where the story becomes more complicated than the usual myth. It was not simply that the church hated bathing. Monastic communities had rules about washing. Religious rituals involved water. Foot washing carried deep symbolic meaning. Cleanliness could be associated with order, humility, hospitality, and preparation. But bathing for pleasure, vanity, or indulgence could be criticized. The problem was not always water. It was what water, warmth, nakedness, leisure, and mixed company might lead to in the eyes of moral authorities. And then there was disease. When plague and other epidemics struck medieval and early modern communities, attitudes toward public bathing could shift. People feared openings in the body, corrupted air, crowded rooms, contaminated spaces, and close contact. In some places, bathhouses declined. In others, they were restricted, regulated, or viewed with suspicion. Again, the exact pattern varied by region and century. But the larger point is clear. Bathing habits were shaped not only by cleanliness, but by fear. Imagine a public bathhouse in a medieval town at its height. Steam hangs in the room. Wooden tubs creak under warm water. People talk, laugh softly, eat, drink, wash, sweat, and submit to treatments. A barber surgeon might be nearby. An attendant carries cloths. The warmth is almost luxurious compared with the cold outside. To one person, this is health and comfort. To another, it is temptation. To a physician, it might be useful if timed correctly. To a moralist, it might be dangerous. To a city official during sickness, it might be a crowded risk. The same place could mean many things at once. That is why medieval baths were not merely rare because people were dirty. They were rare, difficult, or inconsistent because bathing sat at the crossing point of labor, money, medicine, morality, whether gender, class, and fear. Inside the ordinary home, even privacy shaped the experience. Many medieval houses did not have rooms arranged like modern houses. A family might live, sleep, cook, work, and store goods in overlapping spaces. Servants, apprentices, children, animals, and visitors might pass through domestic areas. A full bath required exposure, time, and some degree of seclusion. In a crowded household, that was not always easy. A tub itself was also an object. It had to exist. It had to be stored. It had to be repaired. It might be used for more than one purpose. In some homes, a large wooden tub could be brought out when needed rather than kept as a permanent bathing fixture. The idea of a dedicated bathroom, a private chamber built around washing and waste removal, was far from ordinary. Even in wealthier settings, the arrangements were often temporary, portable, and dependent on service. The temperature of the room mattered. A bath in a cold interior was not a simple pleasure. Medieval buildings could be drafty. Windows might be small or shuttered. Glass was expensive. Smoke from hearths was common. Floors could be earth, timber, rush-covered, or uneven. In winter, undressing for a bath could be unpleasant even before the water cooled. And hot water cooled quickly when poured into a wooden tub in a cold room. So the medieval bath was often a race against discomfort. The water had to be warm enough. The fire had to hold. The person bathing had to wash before the chill returned. Towels and linen had to be ready. Hair had to dry. The room had to be managed. What sounds soothing in a modern bathroom could become a logistical negotiation with cold air, smoke, wood, water, time, and fatigue. And yet, people still bathed when they could. That is the human part worth remembering. Comfort has always mattered. Warmth has always mattered. The feeling of clean skin, eased muscles, rinsed hands, fresh linen, and washed hair did not need modern plumbing to be valued. A medieval person who had been traveling through mud, sleeping in rough lodging, or working near animals did not need germ theory to appreciate hot water. The body itself understood relief. But the body also belonged to a society that read cleanliness through status. A wealthy person could appear cleaner partly because others performed the hardest work of cleanliness for them. Launderers, servants, water carriers, fuel gatherers, bath attendants, and household workers turned cleanliness into something visible. Clean linen and fresh scent could signal order, money, discipline, and respectability. Dirt, by contrast, could mark labor, poverty, travel, illness, or low status, even when it was not a moral failure. This creates a quiet irony. The people most exposed to dirt through labor often had the least access to easy bathing. The people most able to remain visibly clean were often those furthest removed from the dirtiest work. Medieval cleanliness, like modern cleanliness, was never only personal. It was economic. Clothing made this even clearer. Heavy garments were difficult to wash. Wool could shrink, deform, or take a long time to dry. Dyes could bleed. Fur, leather, and lined garments required care. Outer clothing might be brushed, aired, beaten, perfumed, or protected rather than regularly soaked. Linen underlayers, head coverings, and washable accessories became the more practical battlefield of cleanliness. To understand medieval washing, one must look not only at skin but at textiles. Laundry itself was hard labor. Washing clothes could mean soaking, scrubbing, beating, boiling, rinsing, wringing, and drying. Water was heavy here too. So was wet cloth. Soap, lye, ash, urine-based cleaning processes in some textile work, and other methods all belonged to a world where cleaning was physical and often unpleasant. Women, servants, laundresses, and lower-status workers bore much of this burden. Cleanliness may have looked gentle when worn by a noble, but it was often produced by rough hands. And when clothes took time to dry, weather became part of hygiene. Rain, dampness, frost, and smoke could interfere with laundry. A garment washed at the wrong time might remain wet, sour, or stiff. Drying indoors could fill a room with moisture. Drying outdoors depended on space and weather. In crowded towns, clean laundry itself had to compete with smoke, mud, animals, and urban dirt. So when we ask why washing was so hard, we are really asking about an entire material world. The answer is not one thing. It is the well, the fire, the tub, the cloth, the room, the season, the body, the medical theory, the moral anxiety, the price of soap, the labor of servants, the crowded street, the cold morning, the damp sleeve, the shared basin, and the simple fact that nothing about water was effortless. Even soap had its own social life. Medieval soap existed, and in some regions soap-making became an important craft. Soap could be made from fats and alkaline substances, and different areas developed reputations for particular kinds. But access varied. A fine soap scented or carefully prepared for elite use was not the same thing as rougher cleaning materials available to ordinary households. Washing could involve soap, but also sand, ash, herbs, cloth, scraping, rinsing, or other practical methods depending on what was being cleaned. The history of bathing is therefore not a straight line from dirty medieval people to clean modern people. It is a shifting story of infrastructure. Once water systems, fuel access, private rooms, cheap soap, changing medical ideas, and domestic expectations changed, bathing changed with them. But in the medieval world, all those pieces were uneven, fragile, and local. And this is where the next layer begins. Because if bathing was difficult at home and public bathhouses were useful but morally complicated, then medieval society had to develop many smaller rituals of cleanliness that did not look like modern bathing at all. And those smaller rituals often began before the day had fully opened. In a medieval household, cleanliness could start with a basin, a cloth, and a little water that had been saved, carried, or warmed just enough to be useful. A person did not need a full bath to make the body more presentable. They could rinse the face, wipe the neck, wash the hands, smooth the hair, change linen, scrape dirt from under the nails, or adjust a head covering that had protected hair from smoke, dust, and kitchen grease. These were not glamorous acts, but they mattered because they were repeatable. They fit into a world where a full bath might be occasional, but daily life still demanded some form of order. The hands were especially important. They touched bread, bowls, knives, cups, tools, animals, children, coins, door latches, and the hands of others. In better-off households, washing before meals could become a visible ritual of manners. Water might be poured over the hands of guests. Towels might be offered. The gesture was practical but also social. It told everyone at the table that this was a house of discipline and courtesy. Clean hands did not simply remove dirt. They marked the boundary between labor and dining, between the outside world and shared food. This is one of the quiet reversals in the story. Medieval people may not have bathed the way modern people do, but they often cared deeply about moments of visible cleanliness. A dirty face in public, greasy hair at the wrong occasion, stained linen, or unwashed hands at table could all carry meaning. Cleanliness was uneven, but it was not absent. It gathered around the parts of the body society could see, smell, judge, or ritualize. For wealthier men and women, linen became almost a second skin of respectability. A fresh shift, smock, shirt, coif, kerchief, or veil could create the impression of cleanliness even when the body beneath had not been fully bathed. Linen absorbed sweat, protected outer garments, could be laundered more often than heavy wool. The clean white edge at the throat or wrist was not just decorative. It was evidence that someone had access to water, soap, time, and labor. Among the poor, linen still mattered, but it could be worn longer, patched more often, and washed under harsher conditions. A clean garment was not always a daily certainty. Whether illness, work demands, and household poverty interfered. Yet even then, people did what they could. A woman might wash linen in cold water until her hands ached. A servant might scrub cloth for someone else while her own clothing remained worn and smoky. A child might be wiped clean before being brought to church, market, or a household table. The church itself created another layer of washing. Water had sacred meanings, from baptism to foot washing to the cleansing of vessels and hands. In some religious settings, washing the body could be associated with humility, hospitality, obedience, and preparation. Monastic rules often treated bathing carefully, not as a modern hygiene schedule, but as something to be managed according to discipline, health, rank, age, or necessity. The sick might be allowed more washing. The healthy might be restrained from excess. The point was not simply cleanliness, but spiritual order. Foot washing is a useful window into this world. It was practical because feet became dirty quickly on muddy roads, in sandals, shoes, or rough footwear, and in rooms where floors were not always clean. But it was also symbolic. To wash another person's feet was to perform humility and service. In religious life, that action carried echoes of the gospel. In domestic hospitality, offering water could honor a guest. A simple basin at the doorway could therefore hold more meaning than a modern bathroom ever announces. And yet, outside sacred or polite settings, washing could also be deeply ordinary. A cook rinsed hands before handling food. A craft worker washed away residue from a task. A mother cleaned a child with a damp cloth. A traveler removed mud before entering a better room. A barber wiped a client's face. A servant brought water to a chamber. These acts rarely appear in grand chronicles, but they formed the daily texture of medieval cleanliness. The mouth was another place where care existed, though not in modern dental form. People used cloths, picks, powders, herbs, rinses, and chewing substances to manage the teeth and breath. Dental decay, gum disease, worn teeth, and pain were common, but that does not mean the mouth was ignored. Fresh breath mattered socially. Teeth mattered cosmetically. Medical and household texts sometimes offered advice for cleaning the mouth, whitening teeth, or sweetening breath. Some remedies were unpleasant or ineffective by modern standards, but they reveal concern. Smell, perhaps more than sight, shaped the medieval experience of cleanliness. A world of wood smoke, animals, open drains, sweat, damp wool, tallow candles, stale straw, fermenting food, and crowded rooms produced smells that modern people might find overwhelming. But medieval noses were not numb. People noticed bad smells. They complained about them. They associated foul air with danger. They used herbs, flowers, incense, scented oils, vinegar, smoke, and airing to manage atmosphere. This is important because smell was often connected to health. Long before germ theory, many people believed corrupt or foul air could make the body sick. The theory was not the same as modern microbiology, but it made smell medically meaningful. If something stank, it might be morally unpleasant, physically dangerous, or socially embarrassing. Keeping a chamber aired, burning herbs, cleaning waste, or avoiding rotten smells could be understood as part of health protection. Airing things was therefore a kind of cleaning. Bedding could be shaken, beaten, or exposed to fresh air when possible. Clothing could be brushed and hung. Rushes on floors might be replaced, though in some houses they could also collect dirt if neglected. Herbs might be scattered to sweeten a space. These practices did not sterilize a room, but they changed its sensory world. They made life more bearable. Beds reveal this very clearly. A medieval bed was not only a place of sleep. It was a collection of textiles, straw, feathers, wool, linen, wood, curtains, and human warmth. It held the body's oils and sweat, could harbor fleas, lice, and other pests, could smell of dampness if poorly aired. Changing sheets, airing mattresses, shaking bedding, replacing straw, and keeping animals away were all part of domestic cleanliness. But each required labor and opportunity. Here, again, status changed everything. A noble bed with fine linen and attendance could seem clean, soft, and orderly. A poorer bed of straw or rough bedding might be shared by several people and renewed less often. Yet both existed within the same larger reality. Cleanliness depended on maintenance. Without constant attention, the medieval home became a trap for smell, dampness, insects, and smoke. The kitchen created its own problems. Food preparation involved raw meat, fish, grains, ale, dairy, vegetables, herbs, and leftovers. Fires produced soot. Grease clung to surfaces. Water was needed for rinsing vessels and hands, but clean water was not infinite. Wooden bowls, trenchers, knives, pots, and cloths all required care. A household that failed to manage food dirt could attract pests, produce bad smells, and invite sickness. So cleaning was not optional. It was survival. Yet even survival cleaning had limits. A wooden surface absorbed. A clay floor held dampness. A crowded room collected smoke. A shared cup or bowl moved from hand to hand. Animals might wander near domestic spaces. Waste disposal varied widely. The same household could be attentive and still, by modern standards, unhygienic. That tension is essential. Medieval people could be careful without being clean in a modern way. Water quality added another uncertainty. Not all water was equal. A clear spring, a deep well, a river near town, a ditch, a pond, or rainwater collected from a roof all carried different risks and reputations. People often preferred water that looked, smelled, and tasted clean. They understood that foul water was undesirable, but contamination was not always visible. Urban wells could be affected by nearby waste. Rivers used for washing, industry, animals, and disposal could be useful and filthy at the same time. In towns, the same waterway might serve multiple purposes. It could carry goods, power mills, receive waste, support trades, provide fish, and supply washing water. Tanners, dyers, butchers, brewers, washerwomen, and households all needed water. This made medieval urban water a shared resource and a shared problem. Authorities sometimes tried to regulate waste, protect conduits, or control trades that polluted water. But enforcement was uneven, and need often overpowered ideal order. The street itself was a difficult place to keep clean. Mud, manure, straw, discarded food, wastewater, and craft debris could gather quickly. Some towns had rules about sweeping, dumping, drainage, and animal movement. These rules show that people recognized the problem, but they also show how persistent the problem was. You do not regulate what does not trouble you. Walking through a medieval town after rain could mean stepping through softened earth, animal waste, and household runoff. In dry weather, dust could rise and settle on clothes and skin. In winter, slush and smoke could make the air heavy. Entering a home, shop, church, or hall required some negotiation with the dirt outside. Shoes, hems, hands, and cloaks carried the street indoors. This is why thresholds mattered. The doorway separated the public dirt of the street from the controlled dirt of the household. Washing, wiping, changing shoes, shaking cloaks, or simply avoiding the best room in dirty clothing were all ways of managing that boundary. Cleanliness was not total. It was layered. For women, cleanliness carried special social weight. Female respectability was often judged through clothing, hair covering, household order, and bodily modesty. A woman's clean linen, neat veil, orderly home, and careful food handling could be read as signs of virtue, competence, and status. At the same time, women often performed much of the labor that made households appear clean. They washed, scrubbed, aired, prepared, mended, and managed the sensory world of the home. That labor could be harsh. Laundry in cold water was painful. Carrying wet cloth strained the body. Smoke irritated the eyes. Ash, lye, and rough soap could damage skin. Cleaning did not always make the cleaner feel clean. A laundress might produce bright linen for others while standing in damp clothing herself. A servant might bring scented water to a lady's chamber after spending the morning near soot and slop. Cleanliness, like comfort, often moved upward through society. Men's cleanliness was shaped by work and status too. A laborer, soldier, mason, smith, shepherd, or carter could not avoid dirt. His body carried the marks of occupation. Yet grooming still mattered. Beards could be trimmed or shaved depending on fashion, region, and period. Hair could be cut, combed, or covered. Hands might be washed before meals or prayer. A man presenting himself before a lord, a guild, a court, or a bride's family had reason to manage appearance. Barbers played an important role in this public grooming culture. They shaved, trimmed hair, cleaned faces, and in many settings also performed minor medical procedures such as bloodletting or tooth pulling. The barber's shop was therefore part hygiene, part medicine, part sociability. A clean shave or trimmed beard could transform a man's appearance without requiring a full bath. Grooming was one of the ways medieval society made cleanliness visible. Bathing before major life events could also carry meaning. Weddings, religious feasts, knighting ceremonies, and certain forms of hospitality could include washing or bathing as preparation. A bath could mark transition, could cleanse the body symbolically before entering a new status. In elite culture especially, bathing might be connected to refinement, ceremony, or courtly ideals. But ceremony and routine were not the same. The fact that a bride, knight, or honored guest might bathe does not mean everyone bathed often. It tells us that bathing could be special. It could be meaningful precisely because it was not effortless. One of the most revealing things about medieval washing is how often it depended on timing. A bath might be more likely after travel, before a feast, during illness recovery, before a ceremony, or when weather allowed. Laundry might wait for a suitable day. Hair washing might depend on warmth and time to dry. Bedding might be aired when sun appeared. Cleanliness was not simply a habit. It was an arrangement with the calendar. Season mattered intensely. Summer made washing easier in some ways because warmth helped bodies and cloth dry. But summer also brought sweat, insects, stronger smells, and busier agricultural labor. Winter reduced smell in some ways, but made water colder, drying harder, rooms smokier, and full bathing more uncomfortable. Spring mud and autumn damp created their own challenges. The medieval body was always living inside weather. For rural people, streams and ponds could offer washing opportunities, but also discomfort and risk. Cold water was bracing. Privacy was limited. Work did not pause just because someone wanted to feel clean. A quick rinse might be possible. Washing feet, hands, or tools could be practical. But full bathing outdoors was not always convenient, modest, or safe. In many climates, it was seasonal. For urban people, public facilities could help, but money and reputation mattered. A bathhouse visit might be a treat, a medical recommendation, a social outing, or something morally ambiguous. For some, it was accessible. For others, too expensive. for still others risky to reputation. The same hot room that promised relief could also attract suspicion. And suspicion grew stronger in certain periods. As fears of disease increased and public morality tightened in some towns, bathhouses became easier to criticize. Their decline in parts of Europe was not caused by a single event, but by overlapping pressures: epidemic fear, concerns about sexual disorder, changing medical advice, economic shifts, and the difficulty of regulating crowded warm spaces. The decline was uneven, but it changed the culture of public washing. This matters because it overturns the simple idea that Europeans never bathed until modern times. In some medieval towns, public bathing was more visible than it would be later in parts of early modern Europe. The history does not move in a neat straight line. There were periods when communal bathing flourished, then periods when it became more suspect. Cleanliness practices can rise, fall, and transform depending on fear, fashion, medicine, and infrastructure. Meanwhile, private washing continued in quieter ways. Basins did not disappear. Linen did not stop being laundered. Hands did not cease to be washed. Faces were still wiped. Clothing was still aired. Perfumes, herbs, and scented waters still mattered. The disappearance or decline of some bathhouses did not mean the disappearance of all cleanliness. It meant the center of gravity shifted. Perfume and scent are sometimes misunderstood as merely covering filth. They could do that, of course. But scent also belonged to medicine, status, pleasure, and religion. Incense in church changed the air and marked sacred space. Herbs in a chamber suggested care. Rosewater or lavender might be associated with refinement. Sweet smells could comfort the senses in a world where foul smells were common and feared. To smell pleasant was not a trivial matter. Could signal health, morality, wealth, and self-control. Bad smell might suggest poverty, illness, corruption, sin, or neglect, depending on context. This was unfair, of course, because poor people often had fewer means to avoid bad smells. But social judgment rarely waits for fairness. The body itself was also judged through ideas of moderation. Too much indulgent bathing could be viewed as softening, weakening, vain, or morally dangerous. Too little washing could be unpleasant or discourteous. The ideal depended on setting. A monk, a knight, a merchant's wife, a peasant, a bishop, a servant, and a noble child were not expected to manage their bodies in identical ways. Cleanliness was social choreography. Children had their own place in this story. Infants and young children needed washing because they were messy, vulnerable, and closely handled. But water temperature, swaddling, linen, and warmth all mattered. Caregivers had to balance cleaning with fears of chill. A child could be wiped, changed, wrapped, and kept near heat. The labor of keeping a child clean fell heavily on women and servants, and it never waited for perfect conditions. The sick body brought another set of concerns. Illness could make washing more necessary and more dangerous at the same time. Sweat, vomit, blood, pus, fever, and weakness demanded care. But moving a sick person, exposing them to cold, or bathing them at the wrong time could be feared. Medical advice varied, but caution was common. Cleanliness around illness was shaped by both practical need and theoretical anxiety. Hospitals, monasteries, and charitable institutions sometimes managed washing for the sick and poor, but conditions varied widely. A well-run religious house might provide structured care. A crowded urban hospital might struggle. Washing the sick was an act of mercy, but also labor, and sometimes risk. Bodies that could not care for themselves revealed how much cleanliness depended on other people. In that sense, medieval washing was never purely private. Even when it concerned the body, it drew in the household, the servant, the spouse, the mother, the laundress, the bath attendant, the barber, the physician, the priest, and the town official. Cleanliness was a network of relationships. The more power one had, the more invisible that network became. A noble might remember the comfort of warm water. A servant remembered the buckets. This difference shaped how people experienced the same act. To the person bathing, a hot tub could feel like rest. To the person preparing it, the bath might mean aching arms, smoke, spilled water, and extra work. Medieval luxury often hid labor behind the curtain. Cleanliness was one of the places where that hidden labor showed most clearly, if we know how to look. And the curtain itself matters. In wealthier rooms, bed curtains, wall hangings, screens, and chamber arrangements could create private space. A bath might be taken behind cloth, near a fire, in a chamber prepared for comfort. In poorer homes, privacy was harder. A tub might be shared, a room crowded, the schedule awkward. Modesty had to be negotiated through timing, clothing, and household routine. Shared bathing could be practical. Family members might use the same warmed water in sequence. This detail is often exaggerated in popular retellings, but the basic logic is understandable. Water was hard to heat. Reusing it made sense, especially when resources were tight. But it also meant that comfort and cleanliness were ranked. Who bathed first could reflect status, age, gender, health, or household authority. A small domestic decision, then, could reveal the whole hierarchy of the home. The father, the master, the guest, the mother, the children, the servants. The order might vary, but the question itself shows that a bath was not merely about washing skin. It was about access. It was about who received warmth when the water was freshest, and who accepted what remained. And now the story begins to move from the household into the wider medieval town, because the difficulty of washing was never only inside the home. It was also built into streets, trades, markets, water systems, and the rules people made when too many bodies needed the same limited water. And once too many bodies depended on the same limited water, cleanliness stopped being only a private matter and became a civic problem. A medieval town could not survive if everyone treated waste, washing, and water as purely personal concerns. Wells were shared. Streets were shared. Rivers were shared. The smell from one household could drift into another. Refuse thrown from an upper window landed where other people walked. The butcher, the brewer, the tanner, the baker, the washerwoman, and the household servant all used the same urban environment, and every trade left something behind. This meant that medieval cleanliness was shaped not only by habit, but by regulation. Town authorities issued rules that can sound surprisingly familiar. Do not dump waste into certain streets. Do not let animal remains rot near market areas. Do not block drainage channels. Do not allow pigs to wander where they create filth and danger. Keep the front of your property swept. Maintain access to wells and conduits. Dispose of tanning waste away from the main population where possible. These rules were repeated because people broke them, and because the problem never fully disappeared. The very repetition of such laws tells us something important. Medieval people were not blind to urban dirt. They argued about it constantly. A street near a butcher's quarter smelled different from one near a cloth market. A lane beside a stable had its own atmosphere. A neighborhood near a tannery could become infamous. Tanning, in particular, was necessary and unpleasant. Leather was essential for shoes, belts, harnesses, bags, book bindings, and countless other objects. But turning raw hide into usable leather involved soaking, scraping, chemicals, waste, and smells strong enough to define an entire district. The same was true for dyeing cloth, brewing ale, preparing fish, slaughtering animals, or processing wool. Medieval towns were sensory places. They were loud, crowded, smoky, and deeply physical. Cleanliness existed inside that reality, not outside it. Water infrastructure therefore became one of the quiet markers of urban success. Some towns invested in conduits, fountains, channels, and protected wells. Bringing cleaner water into a growing town was not only practical, it was political. It showed competence. It reduced conflict. It supported trade. A public fountain was not merely decorative. It was a daily gathering place, a necessity, and often a site of social hierarchy. Who arrived first mattered. Who had the stronger bucket mattered. Who had servants to stand in line mattered. A wealthy household might send servants repeatedly to fetch water. A poor widow might have to wait, carry it herself, and ration every drop. The same fountain served both, but not equally. Cleanliness followed the same pattern. Access was shared in theory and unequal in practice. Women were often at the center of this water economy. In many places, the daily work of collecting household water fell largely to women, girls, and female servants. Their labor shaped how often clothes were washed, how food was prepared, how children were cleaned, and whether a household could attempt something as ambitious as a warm bath. This is another reason the myth of medieval dirt can be too simple. It often imagines men in castles and ignores the women carrying the buckets. The physical act itself mattered. A full pail of water is heavy now, and it was heavy then. Carrying it over uneven ground, through mud, upstairs in winter cold, or through crowded streets turned every act of washing into an act of labor before the washing even began. A noblewoman's scented bath might begin with a servant's aching shoulders. Public fountains also created social observation. People saw who was orderly, who was careless, who had servants, who came alone, who wore clean linen, who smelled of soap, who looked tired, who appeared ill. Cleanliness was public even before the washing happened. Reputation moved through ordinary places. Markets added another layer. Food had to appear trustworthy. Bread, meat, fish, milk, and ale were judged partly by freshness and smell. Spoiled goods threatened health and reputation. Market inspectors, guild customs, and local expectations all tried, sometimes successfully, often imperfectly, to maintain standards. Washing hands, cleaning tools, rinsing surfaces, and removing visible dirt were part of economic survival. No butcher wanted to be known for rot. No baker wanted accusations of filth. No innkeeper wanted guests complaining of foul chambers. Yet the standards themselves were not modern. A medieval inn might be considered respectable while still smelling of smoke, animals, rushes, and old ale by contemporary expectations. Clean enough did not mean sterile. It meant socially acceptable, functional, and not obviously dangerous. Travel made this even more obvious. A traveler on the road could not maintain the same routines as someone at home. Roads were muddy, inns varied wildly, and water sources were uncertain. A person arriving after days of riding, walking, or cart travel would carry the road on their body. Dust in summer, mud in autumn, wet wool in winter, sweat in any season. Washing after travel was both comfort and restoration. Removing the road from the skin meant returning to ordinary life. This helps explain why bathing before entering court, marriage negotiations, religious festivals, or noble hospitality mattered so much. Dirt from travel was temporary, could be removed, but appearing before others still carrying it signaled disorder. A wash basin by the entrance was not trivial. It was social repair. Pilgrims lived at the far end of this experience. Long-distance religious travel exposed people to crowded roads, shared lodging, weather, and exhaustion. Pilgrimage was spiritually meaningful, but physically dirty. Washing opportunities were inconsistent. Holy wells, rivers, monasteries, and inns offered moments of relief, but the body often endured long stretches of discomfort. Returning home and bathing could feel like a return not only to comfort, but to identity. There is something revealing in that. Medieval bathing was often tied to thresholds: before a feast, after a journey, before marriage, after illness, before prayer, after labor. It marked change. It separated one state from another. In a world where full bathing was difficult, the act itself gained symbolic weight. Marriage rituals show this clearly. In some elite traditions, bridal preparation involved bathing, grooming, fresh linen, scented water, and carefully arranged presentation. The bath was not just hygiene. It was transformation. A woman moved from one social role to another, and the body was prepared to match the moment. Knighting ceremonies could use similar logic. Washing before receiving arms or entering a new status reflected purification and readiness. The symbolic meaning mattered because the practical act was significant. Water had to be prepared. Time had to be given. Ceremony made labor visible. Even death brought washing into focus. Preparing the dead often involved washing the body, arranging clothing, and restoring dignity before burial. This was intimate, necessary work. It reflected care, religious duty, and respect. The washed body became part of the final social presentation of a life. In this way, water marked the first stages of life through baptism and the final stages through burial customs. Cleanliness was woven into existence itself. Children, too, reveal how deeply washing was tied to vulnerability. An infant could not simply be left dirty in a world without disposable solutions. Linen had to be changed. Skin had to be protected. Swaddling, warmth, and washing all had to be balanced carefully. Too much exposure to cold was feared. Too little cleaning created obvious problems. The caregiver's judgment mattered constantly. For the elderly and the ill, washing became a measure of dependence. A healthy adult could wash hands, manage clothing, and care for appearance. A bedridden person could not. Someone else had to step in. This is where cleanliness becomes visible as compassion. To wash another person is intimate in a way that cannot be hidden by status. Monasteries, hospitals, and charitable houses sometimes stood at this edge between hygiene and mercy. Bathing the sick, washing linens, cleaning bedding, and tending weak bodies were practical acts of care. Even when medical knowledge was limited, the work was unpleasant, repetitive, and necessary. Medieval charity was often wet, heavy, and exhausting. And still, despite all of this effort, pests remained a constant companion. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, and other unwelcome inhabitants shaped medieval domestic life more than many modern people realize. They were not signs of personal failure in the modern sense. They were part of living close to animals, straw, shared bedding, wool, travel, and limited washing systems. Even wealthy households struggled with them. Fine curtains did not create immunity. Combing hair was partly beauty and partly defense. Washing linen mattered because it interrupted infestation. Bedding was aired and beaten because sleeping with insects was not pleasant to anyone, regardless of century. Herbal remedies, smoke, grooming routines, and practical vigilance all attempted to manage what could rarely be fully eliminated. This is where romantic visions of medieval life begin to fail most clearly. A candlelit chamber may look beautiful in art, but beauty and comfort were separate things. A rich bed with embroidered hangings could still hide fleas. A noble gown could still smell of smoke. A winter hall with firelight could still be drafty, crowded, and difficult to keep clean. Luxury often softened discomfort. It rarely erased it. And this leads to one of the most useful truths about medieval bathing. The goal was often not perfect cleanliness, but controlled discomfort. People aimed to be clean enough, respectable enough, healthy enough, and comfortable enough within the limits of their world. That threshold changed by class, season, gender, age, and occupation. A peasant in harvest season and a bishop at a cathedral feast were not measured by the same standard. But both understood the difference between freshness and neglect. Even language reflected this. Cleanliness could be associated with honor, discipline, and self-command. Disorder could imply moral weakness or social decline. A household described as well-kept was not only visually pleasing. It suggested competence, hierarchy, and stability. This made servants central to the appearance of noble life. Great households required constant invisible cleaning. Chambers had to be swept. Linen had to be changed. Water had to be carried. Waste had to be removed. Fires had to be managed. Basins had to be filled. Clothes had to be brushed and aired. Beds had to be remade. A lord appearing effortlessly clean was often standing on an entire structure of labor. If that labor failed, reputation suffered quickly. Visitors noticed smells. Guests noticed stained cloth. Court life especially sharpened these judgments. Nobility lived under observation. Clothing, skin, scent, and presentation were political tools as much as personal preferences. Cleanliness could support authority, but it could also provoke criticism if it appeared excessive. Too much bathing, too much perfume, too much concern with appearance could be read as vanity or softness, particularly for men expected to display martial seriousness. Once again, the ideal sat in balance. Not neglect, not indulgence. Medical writers added further complexity. Some recommended baths for specific conditions: joint pain, fatigue, digestive trouble, melancholy, or recovery after illness. Others warned that the wrong bath at the wrong time could weaken the body. Hot baths open the pores, soften the flesh, and change the body's internal balance. This could heal or harm depending on interpretation. Bathing after heavy meals, during certain illnesses, or in extreme weather might be discouraged. A person already weakened by fever might be treated carefully. The same bath that comforted one body might threaten another. Medieval medicine was often cautious because the body was understood as easily disturbed. This caution sometimes extended to sexual morality. Because warm baths relaxed the body and were associated with pleasure, they could attract suspicion. Public bathhouses especially sat at the border between health and indulgence. Some were respectable establishments. Others developed reputations linked to prostitution or moral disorder. Critics did not always distinguish carefully between them. This reputation helped shape later decline. When plague fears intensified and moral reformers found common cause, public baths became easier to target. Closing or restricting them could be presented as both moral discipline and public health. Whether it actually improved hygiene is another question, but the political logic was powerful. And so the medieval town slowly changed. In some places, the lively public bathhouse culture that had once offered warmth and washing became thinner, more regulated, or less central. Private routines took on more importance. Basins, linen, selective washing, and household management remained, while communal bathing lost some of its place. But the memory of baths did not disappear. Stories, complaints, regulations, and architecture preserved the traces. A bathhouse district, an old conduit, a surviving ordinance, a moral sermon, a medical note, all remind us that people thought constantly about the body and its maintenance. The myth says medieval people simply did not wash. The evidence says they worried about washing all the time. They worried about the effort, the cost, the smell, the weather, the danger of cold, the risk of illness, the morality of pleasure, the burden of laundry, the shame of dirty linen, the discomfort of travel, the embarrassment of public smell, the labor of heating water, and the endless return of mud from the street. In other words, they worried about being human. And perhaps nowhere does that feel more immediate than in winter, when bathing became not just difficult, but a negotiation with cold itself, because washing in January inside a drafty medieval house could turn cleanliness into something that felt almost like punishment. And in winter, that negotiation with cold could make even the idea of a bath feel like an argument between comfort and survival. A modern bathroom is designed to protect warmth. Walls are sealed, hot water arrives instantly, towels wait dry and soft, and stepping out of a bath means stepping into a room built for that purpose. In much of medieval Europe, winter washing happened in houses that were not designed around comfort in the same way. Heat gathered unevenly. One side of a room might feel tolerable while another remained sharp with cold. Smoke drifted where it pleased. Drafts found cracks in shutters, floorboards, and doors. Stone held cold stubbornly. Wet cloth took a long time to forgive you. To decide to take a full bath in winter was therefore not simply a question of hygiene. It meant deciding that the warmth of the water would outweigh the misery before and after. First, someone had to collect enough water without freezing hands or slipping on ice. Wells in winter were not romantic places. Buckets were colder to touch, paths were worse, and the journey itself cost more effort. If snow or freezing rain had arrived, the task became heavier still. A servant or family member returning with water was not bringing luxury. They were bringing labor made visible. Then came the fire. Heating a large quantity of water required wood, time, and planning. In winter, fire was already under pressure. Cooked food warmed the sick, dried shoes, protected infants, and made sleeping possible. Fuel had to be divided between competing needs. A family might accept cold hands to keep the cooking fire stronger. They might delay washing to preserve wood for the night. The question was rarely, would a bath be nice? It was, can we justify it? This is why winter washing often leaned even more heavily toward partial cleaning. Hands, face, feet if necessary, intimate washing, and changes of linen could preserve dignity without demanding a full domestic campaign. A basin near the hearth made more sense than a tub in the center of the room. A warmed cloth could be more practical than immersion. And yet, the body in winter also longed for hot water more intensely. After days of cold air, damp wool, muddy hems, smoke-filled rooms, and stiff fingers, warm water could feel almost medicinal. It softened joints, eased muscles, and offered a rare kind of silence to the skin. This is part of why bathhouses remained attractive where they existed. They were not only places of washing, they were places of warmth. In winter especially, warmth itself was a luxury. Imagine entering a public bathhouse from a freezing street. Outside, the road is dark with slush, the air smells of wood smoke, and your cloak has taken the weather into itself. Inside, there is steam. There is heat against the face. The body begins to loosen before the bath even starts. For someone living in a house where warmth was always incomplete, that transition could feel profound. This is also why some authorities distrusted bathhouses so much. They were pleasurable in a way that ordinary life rarely allowed. Pleasure, warmth, nakedness, conversation, and idleness in one room invited both desire and suspicion. The same place that soothed tired bodies could become, in the eyes of moral critics, a threat to discipline. Winter made these moral judgments sharper because it made comfort more valuable. At home, bedding carried much of the burden of warmth. A bed was not just for sleep, it was a strategy against cold. Curtains around the bed trapped heat from bodies and coals. Shared sleeping arrangements were practical. Linen had to be changed carefully because doing so meant exposing warmth. Washing sheets in winter required good timing. Drying them indoors could leave rooms damp. Leaving them unchanged too long invited smell and pests. So even cleanliness in bed became seasonal compromise. People aimed for freshness, but winter punished every ambitious domestic plan. A washed sheet needed drying space. A straw mattress needed airing on a day that might never arrive. A flea problem did not politely wait for spring. The body itself changed in winter routines. Less outdoor washing meant greater dependence on linen, grooming, and air when available. Hair stayed covered more often. Heavy clothing absorbed more of life's smells. Wool cloaks, lined garments, and layers protected against cold but trapped smoke and sweat. A person might feel cleaner after changing a shirt than after attempting a hurried bath. This is another place where modern assumptions fail. We often imagine cleanliness as skin-deep, but in medieval winter, clothing was part of the body's hygiene. A fresh underlayer could restore dignity even when the outer world remained muddy and cold. Linen became a quiet form of bathing. There were also social differences in how winter was endured. A great hall in a noble house might still be drafty, but it had scale, servants, fuel, and options. A private chamber with curtains, warmed stones, and attendants carrying hot water created possibilities unavailable to ordinary people. A peasant cottage, by contrast, might hold family members, tools, animals nearby, smoke from the hearth, and only enough warmth to survive the night. Both were cold by modern standards, but not equally so. This shaped memory. When later writers described luxurious baths, they were often describing elite exceptions. Warm scented water in a private chamber was real, but it was not the daily experience of most people. The ordinary winter wash was smaller, quicker, and far less graceful. Children especially reveal this tension. Washing a child in winter required judgment. Too much cold exposure was feared. A baby's body seemed fragile, open to chill and illness. Warmth had to be protected. Linen had to be changed without losing too much heat. A basin by the fire might be enough. A full bath could feel risky unless conditions were carefully managed. Medical advice often reinforced this caution. Hot water was not automatically safe. The body, according to humoral understanding, could be thrown out of balance by excess heat, excess cold, or the wrong sequence of both. A hot bath followed by exposure to winter air might be seen as dangerous because the pores had opened and the body was vulnerable. Whether or not the theory was correct in modern terms, it shaped behavior. People acted carefully because they believed the risk was real. Even washing hair could become a winter problem. Wet hair dried slowly near smoky hearths, chilled the neck and shoulders. Covering damp hair under cloth could be uncomfortable. Going outdoors with it was worse. So hair washing might be delayed, minimized, or carefully timed. Combing, covering, and oiling often served as more practical maintenance. Hands suffered most visibly. Cold cracked skin. Laundry in winter damaged fingers. Carrying water, working with wool, cleaning with ash or lye, and constant exposure to dampness left hands rough and painful. Cleanliness could injure the cleaner. A laundress in January knew this intimately. There is a quiet unfairness in that image. The person responsible for everyone else's fresh linen often had the least comfort herself. Servants and working women stood at the center of winter hygiene. They scrubbed, boiled, wrung, dried, fetched, and managed. Noble comfort depended on invisible winter labor. A lady stepping into warm bathwater did not erase the servant who had spent the morning carrying it. And servants themselves still needed washing. Their own routines were often compressed into stolen moments. Quick rinses, shared basins, partial washing, a precious change of linen if available. Time belonged first to the household, then to the self. This pattern extended to monasteries and convents as well. Religious houses had rules, but they also had seasons. Winter discipline shaped bathing and laundering. Fires were managed carefully. Warmth was rationed. Communal life made personal privacy limited. Illness, age, and rank could alter access. Even in structured religious settings, Washing was negotiated with cold and duty. The elderly felt winter bathing differently. Older bodies chilled faster and recovered more slowly. A bath could comfort aching joints and still carry danger if warmth was lost afterward. Washing required help, and help required time. Caregivers had to decide what was necessary and what was too risky. Cleanliness became a question of mercy and prudence, not simple routine. Illness made the stakes even higher. Fever, weakness, wounds, and recovery all changed how water was used. A warm cloth might be safer than immersion. Bed linens needed changing when sickness brought sweat or blood. The sick body demanded more cleaning and tolerated less disruption. Medieval care was often a sequence of small acts: wiping the face, changing the shirt, warming water, airing bedding, washing hands before touching food. These are not dramatic scenes, but they are where historical life actually lived. And perhaps that is why the myth of medieval filth survives so easily. Grand history prefers kings and castles. It forgets basins. It forgets the servant carrying water upstairs. It forgets the laundress standing in winter steam. It forgets the child being wiped clean by the hearth. Yet these are the acts that made civilization feel human. Even castles were not exempt from discomfort. Stone walls impressed visitors, but they also trapped cold. Great halls could be magnificent and miserable at once. A noble might dine beneath banners and still wake to icy air and smoky curtains. Bathing in such places required effort, servants, and planning. Grandeur did not create plumbing. In fact, some elite households solved cleanliness through mobility rather than fixed rooms. Portable tubs, heated water carried in, temporary bathing arrangements behind screens. These were practical responses to buildings not designed around permanent bathrooms. Privacy was created through fabric and service, not architecture. The idea of a permanent, dedicated bathing room was rare and valuable. Some wealthy households, palaces, or monastic complexes had more advanced arrangements, but for most people, bathing remained an event assembled rather than a room entered. This also affected gendered privacy. A woman's bathing arrangements were shaped by modesty, household hierarchy, and available female attendants. Men faced similar questions in different settings. Shared space meant that timing mattered. Bathing often happened when rooms could be controlled, servants trusted, and interruptions limited. Reused bathwater, often mocked in modern jokes, belongs here too. It was not absurd. It was economical. Heating water was expensive. If several members of a household needed bathing, using the same prepared water in sequence made sense. It reflected scarcity, not ignorance. The order of bathing could reveal authority more clearly than a family portrait. Who entered first? The guest, the lord, the mother after childbirth, the sick child, the aging father, the servant last? Each answer reveals a household. And childbirth brings another important chapter. Women after childbirth required careful washing, fresh linen, warmth, and controlled recovery. The lying-in period was medically and socially significant. Cleanliness here was linked to survival. Midwives, female relatives, and household women managed a world of water, cloth, blood, heat, and danger. This was not elegant bathing. It was life-preserving work. Menstruation, too, belonged to the hidden labor of washing. Cloths had to be managed, washed, dried, and reused privately. Women's hygiene involved constant practical negotiation that formal records rarely describe in detail, precisely because it was treated as ordinary female responsibility. Silence in the sources does not mean absence in life. The same is true for laborers returning from fields, workshops, and stables. Mud on boots, sweat under wool, dust from roads, flour in the baker's sleeves, blood from slaughter, soot from the forge. These required management even without full bathing. Stripping off outer layers, washing hands and face, cleaning tools, and preserving what little linen could be kept fresh formed the practical rhythm of evening. In winter, the hearth became the center of that rhythm. Light, heat, cooking, drying, and washing all gathered there. The basin near the fire mattered more than any imagined marble bath. Around that small zone of warmth, medieval people negotiated comfort, dignity, and survival. And outside that circle of fire, the streets remained wet, the well remained cold, and the next day's labor waited. This is why winter bathing was not rare because people lacked refinement. It was rare because every bath had to compete with hunger, fuel, illness, weather, and exhaustion. To stay warm through the night often mattered more than smelling fresh in the morning. Yet even then, people still sought moments of relief. A warm foot bath after travel, a basin for a guest, clean linen before church, fresh sheets for a sick relative, herbs scattered across rushes, hair combed by candlelight, a child washed before sleep, steam rising from a wooden tub prepared for a bride. These small scenes survive because they mattered. They remind us that cleanliness was never only about dirt. It was about respect, for the body, for the household, for guests, for God, for status, for recovery, for love. And if winter showed the limits of washing most clearly, summer revealed a different problem entirely, because when heat arrived, bathing became easier in some ways, but the smells of medieval life became impossible to ignore. And when summer arrived, the problem changed from preserving warmth to surviving closeness. Heat transformed everything. The same house that felt mercilessly cold in January could feel heavy and stale in July. Air stopped moving. Wool clothing became harder to tolerate. Food spoiled faster. Water turned suspect more quickly. Animals smelled stronger. Streets thickened with waste and dust. What winter concealed under frost, summer made impossible to ignore. This is where the modern imagination often becomes more accurate, though still too simple. Yes, medieval towns in summer could smell terrible. But the important question is not whether they smelled. It is how people lived with that reality, how they judged it, and what they did to resist it. Summer made washing easier in one obvious sense. Cold was less frightening. A person could wash outdoors more comfortably. Linen dried faster. Hair dried without becoming a punishment. Water drawn from a well did not feel like an attack on the skin. Children could be cleaned more easily. Laundry could be spread in sun and air. A river, stream, or courtyard basin became more inviting than in winter. But summer also created more need. Bodies sweated. Work intensified. Harvest labor, travel, market days, and longer hours outdoors covered people in dust and grime. Skin felt sticky beneath linen. Feet suffered inside shoes and leather. Hair held heat. Animals brought insects. Kitchens became hotter and more difficult. A full bath might be easier to imagine, but the need for freshness also returned faster. This tension shaped ordinary life. People could wash more easily, but they also became dirty more quickly. The street itself changed character. In dry weather, mud hardened into dust. Every cartwheel and footstep lifted it. Fine particles settled on clothing, bread stalls, window ledges, skin, and bedding. A traveler arriving in summer might be dry rather than muddy, but no less marked by the road. Dust became its own form of dirt, lighter, more constant, and harder to fully escape. Markets intensified this sensory world. Fish spoiled faster. Meat required speed and attention. Milk turned quickly. Ale, bread, herbs, and vegetables all moved through warmer air that encouraged decay. The smell of a medieval market in summer was not one single odor but a layered argument between freshness and rot. This made smell a form of information. People judged food by scent because they had to. A sour note in milk, a sweetness gone wrong in meat, stale ale, fish turned too long in heat. These were warnings before science named bacteria. The nose served the stomach. Bad smell could mean danger, and households learned to trust it. The same principle extended to illness. Summer heat, stagnant water, and foul air often increased fear of sickness. Even without modern germ theory, people noticed patterns. Certain seasons felt more dangerous. Certain smells felt threatening. Swamps, standing water, rotting matter, and overcrowded urban air created anxiety because they seemed to produce illness. And sometimes, through different mechanisms than people understood, they did. So windows opened when possible. Bedding was aired. Herbs were hung. Vinegar, flowers, incense, and scented waters entered domestic life not merely as decoration, but as attempts to make air safer, sweeter, or at least more bearable. A room that smelled pleasant could feel morally and physically healthier. This is why scent mattered so much to elite households. Rosewater, lavender, rosemary, mint, sage, and imported perfumes were not simply vanity. They were part of environmental management. A noble chamber with herbs scattered across rushes and linen aired near open windows was performing both status and practical comfort. Of course, poor households had fewer options. Fresh herbs might still be used, but imported perfumes were luxuries. Airing bedding required space. Replacing rushes on the floor required materials. Opening a window did little if the street below was filled with waste and animals. Summer comfort, like winter warmth, followed money. Rural life had its own version of the same problem. Heat in the countryside meant labor under the sun. Animal smells intensified by warmth, insects everywhere, and bodies that never stayed clean for long. A person working with hay, grain, livestock, or fields could wash in the evening and wake already preparing to become dirty again. Yet rivers and ponds offered possibilities. Bathing outdoors, especially in warm weather, was more practical than winter immersion. Washing feet in a stream, rinsing after labor, cleaning clothes near water sources, these belonged to ordinary rural rhythms. But privacy remained limited, and modesty shaped behavior. Men, women, and children navigated shared landscapes with strong social expectations. Bathing in nature was not automatically carefree. It depended on time, place, and who might be watching. For townspeople, summer often revived the appeal of public bathhouses. Warm weather did not remove the attraction of heated bathing spaces, because baths offered more than temperature. They offered washing, grooming, conversation, and a kind of managed comfort. Sweating, steam, and cleansing could feel restorative after long days of labor or travel. In some places, bathhouses became social centers as much as hygiene spaces. Business could be discussed there, friendships maintained, meals eaten, treatments offered. Bath attendants, barbers, and household staff moved through a small economy built around the body. And once again, morality followed close behind. A summer bathhouse full of heat, food, mixed company, and leisure was exactly the sort of place likely to attract criticism from preachers and officials. Was it a place of health or indulgence? A useful service or a moral danger? The answer depended on who was speaking, and often on who was being watched. Women's presence in bathhouses created particular attention. Respectable bathing, medical need, social routine, and public suspicion could exist at the same time. Reputation mattered. A woman's use of public bathing spaces might be ordinary in one town and morally questioned in another. The same act could be judged differently depending on class, widowhood, marriage, or rumor. This reminds us again that medieval cleanliness was never just physical. It was reputational. A person might be clean and still judged improper. Another might be dirty from honest labor and respected. Cleanliness moved through the body, but also through social interpretation. Summer clothing reveals this especially well. Lighter linen layers became even more valuable. Fresh shirts, shifts, head coverings, and undergarments helped manage sweat and heat. Washing linen more often made sense because it touched the skin directly. Wool outer garments remained important, but the desire for lighter, cleaner contact with the body grew stronger. The laundering of linen in summer was still hard work, but it was kinder than winter. Cloth dried faster. Sun helped. Open air made the labor feel more possible. Washerwomen worked in rhythms shaped by weather, gossip, and strength. Riversides and courtyards became places of domestic industry. This labor was visible. One of the easiest mistakes in historical imagination is to separate cleanliness from work. But in medieval summer, clean linen hanging in sunlight was one of the clearest signs of invisible labor made visible. Every shirt drying on a line represented water carried, soap used, hands scrubbed raw, cloth wrung heavy, and time spent. Servants, laundresses, wives, daughters, and hired women created the appearance of order through exhausting repetition. Summer also made the body itself more public. Sleeves might be lighter, collars more open, outdoor labor more visible. Sweat marked effort. Smell traveled. A person's bodily presence became harder to hide. This sharpened the social pressure to manage appearance. Hair, especially, became a battlefield of comfort and respectability. Covered hair trapped heat. Uncovered hair could create social judgment depending on status and place. Combing removed dust and lice. Washing hair became more practical in warm weather, but still required time and drying. Women balanced modesty, comfort, and presentation every day. Men faced similar negotiations through beards, shaved faces, and work grime. A merchant appearing before clients, a clerk in service to a noble house, or a craftsman seeking respectability had reason to manage appearance even in heat. The barber's role did not disappear with the season. If anything, summer made grooming more urgent. Feet deserve their own history here. Medieval roads punished feet constantly. In summer, dry roads created dust and heat inside shoes. In towns, leather footwear met stone, mud remnants, and street waste. Washing feet at day's end was practical relief. A warm foot bath, even when full bathing was impossible, could be an act of mercy toward oneself. This small domestic gesture appears again and again across time because it answered something basic. The feet carried the world home. Hospitality often recognized this. Offering water for a guest's hands or feet was not symbolic alone. It acknowledged the reality of travel. Before conversation, before food, before status, there was dust to remove. This practical compassion is one of the most human parts of medieval washing. It reminds us that people understood fatigue with their bodies first. Illness in summer added another layer of fear. Heat spoiled food, insects multiplied, and water sources became suspect. Fever season felt real because it was. Medical advice often turned toward cooling, balance, and caution. Baths might be recommended or forbidden depending on symptoms and interpretation. Again, washing was never simple. It sat inside a medical worldview where the body could be tipped too far by the wrong action. A hot bath in winter and a cooling wash in summer were not morally neutral choices. They belonged to systems of belief about what the body needed. Even saints and religious discipline interacted with this. Excessive concern for bodily comfort could be criticized, but filth itself was not always admired either. Holiness was not simply dirtiness. Religious life balanced humility, health, discipline, and communal order. Monasteries needed laundry. Churches required clean linens for sacred use. Bodies preparing for worship still existed inside practical reality. There is also the question of nakedness, which shaped bathing more deeply than modern viewers sometimes realize. Private bathroom normalizes nudity. Medieval shared spaces did not. Bathing required trust, timing, or institutional permission. Public baths had customs. Households had arrangements. Gender, rank, and modesty governed exposure. A full bath was not only about water, it was about being seen or not being seen. This mattered especially for women, but not only for them. Honor and vulnerability lived close to the skin. So sometimes partial washing was not merely easier. It was socially safer. A basin at the bedside respected modesty. A servant bringing warm water allowed privacy. A cloth and fresh linen solved what a public bath complicated. The medieval body was managed through compromise. And compromise perhaps defines the entire story. Because the truth is not that people chose between being clean and being dirty. They chose between competing discomforts. Cold or washing. Fuel or hot water. Privacy or convenience. Labor now or embarrassment later. Expense or smell. Reputation or risk. Every household made these choices differently. A merchant family in a growing town, a widow in a village, a noble household on progress, a monastery in winter, a traveler at an inn, a laundress by the river, a bride before her wedding, a sick child by the hearth. Each lived inside the same question with different answers. What does it take to feel clean enough to face the world? And sometimes the answer was surprisingly emotional. Fresh linen before Massachusetts washed hands before sharing bread. Clean hair before meeting a future spouse. A scented room before receiving guests. A bath before childbirth recovery. A changed sheet for someone dying. These were not luxuries in the shallow sense. They were gestures of dignity. Cleanliness told people they still belonged to ordinary life. This is perhaps why so many medieval household accounts mention soap, linen, basins, towels, combs, oils, and bath arrangements alongside food and fuel. These were not decorative details. They were part of maintaining personhood in a difficult world. Even kings and queens, for all their distance from ordinary life, still depended on these same fundamentals. Royal households traveled with basins, servants, linens, perfumes, and elaborate systems of domestic management. Ceremony made the washing more refined, but not fundamentally different. A crown did not prevent sweat, and yet royal example also shaped fashion. If a court valued scented waters, cleaner linen, certain grooming styles, or ceremonial bathing, others noticed. Cleanliness could move downward through imitation, just as labor moved upward through service. Fashion, medicine, morality, and infrastructure all kept touching the same basin. By late medieval and early modern periods, changing fears around plague, shifting medical advice, and the decline of some public bath cultures would reshape how Europeans thought about immersion itself. In some places, people became more suspicious of frequent bathing than earlier generations had been. Water that once signaled health could begin to carry anxiety. That reversal seems strange to us now, but it followed the same old logic. People were trying to stay alive with the knowledge they had. And it is there, at that uneasy turning point, where the bathhouse begins to lose prestige, where perfume grows more important, where linen replaces immersion as the safer path to respectability, that the next chapter of washing becomes even stranger than the medieval one. And that next chapter becomes stranger precisely because it looks, at first glance, like progress moving backward. It is easy to assume that history moves neatly from less bathing to more bathing, from dirt to cleanliness, from ignorance to modern hygiene. But the late medieval and early modern transition refuses that simple story. In some parts of Europe, especially from the 15th century onward and deep into the 16th and 17th, full immersion bathing in public spaces became less common and, in certain circles, more suspect. The irony is difficult to miss. At the very moment when cities were growing, trade was expanding, and courtly refinement was becoming more elaborate, some people were becoming more cautious about the bath itself. Why? Part of the answer lies in disease, and part lies in fear. The great waves of plague left more than death behind. They left habits of suspicion. Crowded public spaces could be reimagined as dangerous. Shared heat and shared bodies no longer looked only like comfort. They could look like exposure. Bathhouses, once practical and social, now carried associations that were harder to ignore. At the same time, medical thinking about the body remained deeply tied to the idea of pores, vapors, and vulnerability. A hot bath was believed to open the body. If bad air, what many people thought of as corrupted or unhealthy air, surrounded you, then opening the body too much could seem dangerous. In that logic, bathing was not simply cleansing. Could be an invitation. This belief sounds strange now, but it was internally consistent. If illness traveled through foul air, and a bath opened the skin to the world, then too much bathing might feel like lowering the city gates during a siege. So caution grew. This did not mean people stopped caring about cleanliness. In fact, in many ways, concern with bodily presentation intensified. But the method changed. Instead of trusting immersion, many households leaned harder into linen, dry grooming, scented coverings, hand washing, face washing, and the management of visible respectability. Clean linen became almost a moral argument. A fresh shirt, a clean chemise, a carefully laundered collar, white cuffs at the wrist. These suggested discipline, refinement, and health. If outer garments were expensive and difficult to wash, then the underlayers carried even more symbolic power. Changing linen regularly became one of the clearest signs of personal order. This was especially true among elites. Court life rewarded appearance with ruthless precision. A person entering noble society was judged immediately by clothing, smell, grooming, posture, and the condition of their household. Fresh linen could communicate what a full bath once promised. That one was civilized, controlled, and fit for company. Perfume expanded its role here as well. Scented gloves, pomanders, rosewater, lavender sachets, rosemary branches, orange blossom water, ambergris, musk. These belong to a world increasingly invested in controlling atmosphere without necessarily trusting frequent immersion. Fragrance was not only vanity, it was defense, status, and medicine woven together. A pomander carried near the face, for example, might be used because pleasant smells were thought to resist corruption in the air. A scented room was not simply indulgent. It was part of feeling protected. Once again, the body was being managed through interpretation. To modernize, avoiding a bath while carrying perfume can look absurd. But to the people living it, the logic could be perfectly serious. If hot baths weakened the body or opened it to illness, then careful washing of exposed areas, fresh linen, and controlled scent could seem wiser than soaking. There is an important caution here. We should not imagine all of Europe suddenly refusing water. Practices varied enormously by region, class, and century. Some people still bathed regularly. Certain bath cultures continued. Hot springs remained valued. Royal households could maintain elaborate bathing rituals. Monasteries and hospitals still had practical needs. Rural people still washed in streams, basins, and tubs. But culturally, the meaning of bathing shifted. Public bathhouses, especially the older medieval urban versions, lost some of their central place. In some regions, they declined sharply. In others, they survived differently. Their disappearance was not universal, but their social prestige changed. This had consequences for architecture. When public bathing weakened, private washing had to carry more of the burden. Basins became more important. Washstands entered chambers. Portable tubs still existed, but everyday life increasingly centered on selective washing rather than communal immersion. Bedrooms, dressing rituals, and clothing systems became more significant than bathhouses. The bedroom itself became a stage for cleanliness. A noblewoman rising in the morning might be attended with basins of water, cloths, combs, perfumes, fresh linen, and hair arrangements rather than a full bath. A gentleman preparing for court might wash face and hands, shave, change linen, scent gloves, and brush outer garments. These rituals were intimate, repetitive, and socially essential. The performance of being clean became almost as important as the sensation of being clean. This sounds cynical, but it was also practical. Full bathing was disruptive. Selective grooming was manageable. If one's hands, face, hair, linen, and scent were correct, the body could appear ordered without the enormous labor of constant immersion. The poor, of course, experienced this differently. Fresh linen as a daily marker of respectability assumes one owns enough linen to change frequently. Many did not. Laundry still required labor, soap, water, and time. A servant washing the fine linen of a noble household might own very little herself. The same symbolic system that rewarded visible cleanliness also punished poverty. This created social cruelty. A person could be judged morally for signs of labor they could not avoid. The smell of sweat, smoke, stable work, fish handling, tanning, or street life was not simply unpleasant. It could become a sign read by others as low status. Cleanliness and class became harder to separate. This was especially harsh for women. Female respectability was often tied to visible order, clean linen, arranged hair, modest dress, well-kept domestic space. A woman with fewer resources faced harsher judgment for the same conditions that men might have excused as labor. Marriage markets, domestic service, and household reputation all turned cleanliness into social currency. Servants stood again at the center of this system. The polished appearance of aristocratic life rested on endless unseen work. Boiling linen, scrubbing collars, airing bedding, brushing velvet, managing chamber pots, carrying water, heating washing water, preparing basins, arranging towels, cleaning wigs later in history, maintaining shoes, and preserving the illusion that refinement happened naturally. It did not. A court looked elegant because someone else had done exhausting physical work before sunrise. Even kings lived inside that dependency. Royal wardrobes required armies of maintenance. Fine shirts, lace collars, embroidered linens, and ceremonial garments demanded washing and repair on a scale ordinary people could barely imagine. Cleanliness at the top of society was not effortless luxury. It was organized labor, and still smell could betray everything. Crowded courts, despite their beauty, were not automatically pleasant. Heavy fabrics trapped scent. Perfumes mixed rather than erased. Fires smoked. Chamber pots existed even in palaces. Bodies lived beneath silk just as they did beneath wool. The difference was management, not escape. Travel remained one of the great disruptors. Roads still dirted everyone. Inns varied wildly. Dust and mud ignored rank. A noble arriving at court after a journey required restoration before presentation. Washing, grooming, fresh clothing, perhaps a bath if possible. Cleanliness remained tied to thresholds. To appear in public carrying the road on your body was still a failure of order. This is why hospitality rituals survived so strongly. Water offered to a guest, clean towels, refreshed linen, prepared chambers. These acts reassured the traveler that they had re-entered civilization. The body was being invited back into society. Children reveal another continuity. However fashions changed, children still needed cleaning. Linen still needed changing. Skin still reacted to neglect. Wet nurses, mothers, servants, and caregivers still performed the same quiet labor around bodies too young to manage themselves. Illness, too, resisted fashion. A feverish patient might still need wiping, changing, washing, and careful bedding. Blood, childbirth, wounds, sweat, and age did not disappear because society preferred perfume. In moments of vulnerability, practical washing returned with force. The sick body cared less about fashion and more about relief. Hospitals and charitable houses, therefore, remained deeply physical places. Clean linen, changed bedding, warm water, washed hands. These mattered even when theory disagreed about the perfect bath. Mercy often looked like laundry. There is another strange twist here. While some elites became more cautious about bathing, other forms of water culture remained admired. Hot springs, spa towns, and mineral waters continued to attract attention. Healing waters had ancient prestige. Bathing for cure could be more acceptable than bathing for ordinary cleanliness. This reveals how much intention mattered. A bath for vanity might be criticized. A bath for treatment could be respected. The same tub meant different things depending on the story told around it. Religious attitudes reflected the same complexity. Excessive bodily indulgence could be condemned, but so could visible neglect if it threatened social order or sacred duties. Churches still required clean altar linens. Clergy still lived in bodies. Monastic discipline still balanced humility and health. Holiness was never as simple as dirt equals virtue. The language of clean and unclean also moved morally, socially, and spiritually at once. Physical washing could symbolize repentance, renewal, readiness, and discipline. But moral purity was never guaranteed by soap. This tension made cleanliness powerful. It was visible but never enough. Fashion amplified everything. As collars widened, sleeves changed, lace appeared, and delicate fabrics demanded careful treatment. Laundering became even more specialized. A white collar at court was not just cloth. It was evidence of servants, soap, boiling water, skilled ironing, and money. Cleanliness became architecture worn on the body. This also made stains terrifying. Wine, mud, candle wax, sweat marks, kitchen smoke, street dust, each threatened social presentation. A noble worried about a stained sleeve for the same reason a peasant worried about torn boots. Appearance shaped opportunity. Laundry, therefore, became one of the most constant forms of female labor across class lines, though unequally distributed. Noble women supervised or symbolized order. Servants and laundresses produced it with their hands. The riverbank, the washhouse, the courtyard, and the steaming laundry room were as important to civilization as council chambers and churches. They simply left fewer monuments. And still, despite all this effort, the body remained stubbornly human. Teeth decayed, feet hurt, hair became oily, skin cracked, fleas returned, linen yellowed, summer smelled, winter froze. The fantasy of total control remained just that, a fantasy. This is perhaps why satire and complaint about smell appear so often in later writing. People noticed. They joked, criticized, and feared bodily failure because no one fully escaped it. A perfume merchant promised improvement because improvement was always incomplete. A barber thrived because faces kept growing stubble. A laundress worked because yesterday's shirt could never remain fresh forever. History did not move toward permanent cleanliness. It moved toward new systems for managing the same vulnerable body. And across that transition, one thing remained constant. Washing was rarely just about washing. It was about being acceptable to others, safe from illness, ready for ceremony, worthy of respect, and sometimes simply able to sleep without feeling the entire road still clinging to your skin. That is why the old medieval bathhouse matters so much. It was never just a room of hot water. It was a meeting point of medicine, class, morality, pleasure, suspicion, and relief. Its decline did not end the story of bathing. It simply pushed that story into smaller rooms, private rituals, and cleaner shirts. By the time later centuries would build new ideals of hygiene, people had already spent generations learning to trust linen more than immersion. And yet, beneath perfume and polished collars, there remained an older memory, that feeling of deep relief when the whole body entered warm water after cold, labor, illness, or travel. That memory never fully disappeared. It waited in hot springs, in private tubs, in childbirth recovery, in preparation for weddings, in the care of the sick, in the washing of the dead, and in those rare domestic evenings when enough wood, enough privacy, and enough strength came together for a real bath. Because even in an age suspicious of immersion, the human body still recognized comfort. And that quiet recognition would eventually help reshape everything again, when new cities, new plumbing, and new scientific ideas began to change not just how people washed, but what cleanliness itself was believed to mean. And when those new cities began to rise, cleanliness stopped being only a domestic struggle and became something governments, engineers, doctors, and entire societies tried to redesign. The medieval world had always known that foul smells, bad water, and crowded waste created danger. But the explanation had often rested in balance, corruption, and bad air rather than invisible organisms. People acted on what they could see, smell, and reason through. They cleaned what offended the senses. They feared what seemed to rot. They trusted fresh air, moving water, and washed linen because experience taught them these things mattered. What changed later was not the discovery that dirt was unpleasant. It was the growing belief that danger could exist where the eye and nose found nothing at all. This was a profound shift. If disease came not only from obvious filth but from contamination hidden in water, on hands, in cloth, or in shared contact, then cleanliness had to become more systematic. Could no longer rely only on appearance or smell. A shirt that looked clean might not be enough. A clear glass of water might still carry harm. The old language of respectable freshness began to meet a new language of sanitation. And cities forced that confrontation. As populations grew, older medieval habits strained under pressure. Wells that served smaller communities became inadequate for dense urban life. Streets that tolerated animal traffic and household waste became dangerous when multiplied by thousands of bodies. Shared privies, open drains, overflowing cesspits, and polluted rivers were no longer local inconveniences. They became civic crises. The scale changed everything. A village could survive with habits a city could not. Once people lived stacked closer together, once industry expanded, once trade intensified, once streets carried more people than rain could quietly cleanse, the old balance broke. This is where medieval and modern cleanliness part ways most clearly. In the older world, washing was often managed household by household. One family handled its linen, its water, its chamber pots, its animals, its thresholds. The town intervened when smells became unbearable or drains blocked. But much of cleanliness remained local and personal. In the growing city, cleanliness became infrastructure. Pipes mattered. Sewers mattered. Water pressure mattered. Waste removal schedules mattered. Public fountains gave way to more ambitious systems. Streets required new forms of regulation. The idea of a city as a machine of hidden flows, clean water in, dirty water out, began to define modern life. This was not immediate and it was not smooth. Many cities remained filthy for a long time, but the ambition changed. Instead of managing dirt around daily life, societies began trying to remove it before daily life touched it. That required money, politics, and argument. Who paid for clean water? Who had access first? Which neighborhoods were protected? Which streets were paved? Which districts received drains and which remained wet, poor, and ignored? Cleanliness remained social inequality wearing a new costume. The wealthy often gained private water access earlier. Better drains, better streets, private bathing rooms, More linen, more servants, and more privacy still separated comfort from struggle. Technology did not erase class. It reorganized it. Yet even before plumbing fully transformed ordinary homes, ideas were changing. Doctors and reformers increasingly connected washing to prevention rather than mere presentation. Hand washing, laundering, cleaner births, cleaner hospitals, and safer water became questions of life and death rather than only dignity. The body was still social, but now it was also understood as biologically vulnerable in ways older theories had not described. Hospitals reveal this transformation almost painfully. For centuries, caring for the sick involved compassion, linen, warm water, and prayer, but not always a clear understanding of infection. A physician or attendant could move from one patient to another carrying unseen danger without knowing it. A bed might be changed and still remain part of a larger chain of illness. When the idea took hold that cleanliness itself could interrupt disease, hospital washing changed meaning. Clean sheets were no longer simply comforting. They could be protective. Washed hands were not only polite, they could save lives. It is difficult now to imagine how radical that realization was. Something as ordinary as washing hands before touching a patient sounds almost too simple to matter. But history is often moved by humiliatingly simple truths discovered too late. This also changed childbirth. For much of history, childbirth was managed through female knowledge, experience, warmth, cloth, and endurance. Midwives understood practical realities deeply, but the invisible risks of infection were often hidden within ordinary care. Once washing, boiled linens, and cleaner handling became associated with survival, the room itself changed. Cleanliness entered the most intimate human threshold in a new form. The irony is sharp. After centuries of fearing baths might weaken the body, later generations would learn that not washing hands could kill it. This did not mean older people were foolish. They were working inside different knowledge. But it does remind us that hygiene is not a natural instinct fully formed. It is history. The private bathroom, so ordinary now, was one of the final products of this long shift. A room dedicated to bathing, washing, waste removal, mirrors, privacy, and regular bodily care would have looked extraordinary to most medieval households. Not because they disliked cleanliness, but because such a room requires entire systems behind the wall. Pipes, pressure, drainage, heating, architecture, and expectation. Expectation matters. Once daily bathing becomes normal, anything less feels like neglect. But expectation is historical. For much of the past, a daily full bath would have looked wasteful, exhausting, or impossible. What changed was not only technology, but the social definition of what counted as properly clean. That definition kept moving. In some periods, clean linen and scented skin were enough. In others, immersion returned as virtue. Later, industrial cities would create their own anxieties: factory soot, crowded tenements, shared public baths, municipal reform, school inspections, soap advertisements, moral campaigns around domestic order. Cleanliness became public morality again, but under new language. A clean home suggested discipline. A scrubbed child suggested good parenting. Soap was sold not only as hygiene but as respectability. The old medieval connection between bodily order and moral judgment never truly disappeared. It simply changed its clothing. And once again, the burden often fell heavily on women. The good household, in later centuries, still depended on invisible cleaning labor. Floors, laundry, children, sheets, food preparation, bathing routines, all still turned around female responsibility, whether performed by wives, daughters, servants, or hired workers. Plumbing reduced some labor and created new standards at the same time. A machine can save work and also raise expectations so much that work never really ends. The laundress at the river and the mother managing a modern bathroom are not the same figure, but they are not strangers either. Both are judged by the visible order of bodies and cloth. The body stubbornly remains political. Even today, smell carries class. Stains carry embarrassment. Fresh clothing changes confidence. Hospitality still begins with water offered, towels prepared, a guest room made ready. A person returning from travel still wants the same thing a medieval traveler wanted: to stop feeling like the road is still on them. This continuity matters because it prevents us from treating the past as alien. The medieval woman changing into fresh linen before church, the servant warming water for an aging parent, the traveler washing dust from his feet, the mother wiping a child by the hearth. None of these people are difficult to understand. Their world was harder, but their instincts were familiar. They wanted relief. They wanted dignity. They wanted not to be ashamed of how they smelled in public. History becomes most trustworthy when it notices these small recognitions. Even language keeps them alive. We still speak of feeling fresh, clean, put together, washed up after the day. These are emotional states as much as physical ones. Medieval people knew that too. A bath could change mood, not just skin. This is why ceremonial washing remained powerful even after public bathhouses declined. A bride before marriage, a patient recovering from illness, a noble before court presentation, a pilgrim returning home, a corpse prepared for burial. Water marked transitions because it changed how a body belonged to the world. The symbolism survived every medical theory. Religious traditions continued to preserve this most clearly. Baptism, ablutions, ritual washings, hand-washing before sacred acts. These remind us that water was never only practical. It carried ideas of readiness, humility, and renewal far older than plumbing. Even secular life borrowed that feeling. A warm bath before an important day still feels like preparation. A clean shirt before difficult news still feels like control. We are not as modern as we think. The medieval bathhouse, then, should not be remembered only as a curiosity or a dirty joke about the past. It was part of a long argument humanity has always had with the body. How much discomfort is normal? How much labor is reasonable for dignity? Who gets privacy, warmth, and clean water first? Who does the work that allows others to feel effortless? Those questions did not end when plumbing arrived. In some ways, they became sharper. Cities with clean fountains for the wealthy and polluted districts for the poor repeated old hierarchies with new tools. Colonial systems carried assumptions about cleanliness and civilization into cruel moral judgments. Industrial labor created new dirt and new shame. Public health campaigns sometimes protected people and sometimes blamed them for conditions they could not control. Cleanliness remained both necessity and accusation. This is why the old image of dirty medieval people can be more misleading than helpful. It lets modern people feel superior without asking harder questions about our own systems. It turns history into a costume instead of a mirror. Because if enough hot water disappeared tomorrow, if fuel became precious, if pipes failed, if too many families shared too little space, our routines would change very quickly. The medieval world was not dirty because people lacked standards. It was difficult because comfort depends on infrastructure most people rarely notice. Remove the pipes and the centuries collapse. Suddenly the basin matters again. The well matters again. The person carrying water matters again. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson beneath all of this. Cleanliness has always been a collaboration between the body and the world around it. It is never only personal. It depends on labor, design, weather, class, and belief. A bath is never just a bath. It is wood cut in winter, soap made by hand, linen boiled, floors scrubbed, wells protected, streets drained, servants exhausted, engineers planning, mothers wiping faces, laws about waste, fear of plague, the memory of illness, the promise of respectability. The the simple human hope of feeling restored. That long chain stretches backward further than most people imagine. And if we return to the medieval house one last time, not the castle of fantasy, but the ordinary room with smoke in the rafters, a basin by the hearth, damp boots near the door, a child asleep, laundry half dry, and someone deciding whether there is enough wood left to heat water tonight, we find something far more interesting than the myth of dirt. We find people making practical choices inside hard limits. Maybe they choose only to wash hands and face. Maybe the child gets the warm water first. Maybe the old parent needs it more. Maybe the bath waits until Sunday. Maybe a guest arrives and changes the plan. Maybe a wedding justifies extra firewood. Maybe winter wins and everyone settles for fresh linen and hope. None of that is laziness. It is domestic economics. And it is there, in those ordinary decisions, that medieval bathing becomes understandable rather than exotic. Not a world without cleanliness. A world where cleanliness had a price. And once you see that clearly, the old question changes. Instead of asking why medieval people bathed so rarely, you begin asking something more honest. With water heavy, fuel costly, privacy scarce, medicine uncertain, and every household balancing survival first, how often would we really have bathed ourselves? That question lingers because it does not belong safely in the past. It leads us forward toward another uncomfortable truth about history. Sometimes what we call progress is simply forgetting how much work someone else is doing for our comfort, and perhaps that is the quietest ending to all of this. When we look back at medieval bathing, we are often tempted to search for a verdict. Were people clean or dirty, civilized or careless, primitive or practical? But history rarely rewards simple judgments. It rewards patience. The people living in medieval towns and villages were not strangers to discomfort, and they were not strangers to dignity either. They understood sweat, smoke, cold floors, damp linen, aching backs, foul streets, and the embarrassment of appearing before others when life had left itself visibly on the body. They also understood the relief of warm water, the pleasure of fresh cloth against the skin, the quiet pride of a well-kept home, and the kindness of someone preparing a basin for you when you were too tired to ask. They did not ignore cleanliness. They negotiated it. They washed within the limits of fuel, weather, labor, class, and belief. They trusted linen because linen was practical. They feared cold because cold could kill. They valued bathhouses because warmth mattered. They distrusted them when disease and morality changed the meaning of shared water. They made choices that were rational inside the world they knew. And that world was built on something modern life often hides from us: effort. Every clean shirt required work. Every warm bath required planning. Every fresh bed, washed child, welcoming guest room, or respectable public appearance depended on hands we often do not see in the grander versions of history. Servants, laundresses, mothers, daughters, bath attendants, water carriers, and household workers made civilization feel cleaner than it really was. In truth, they still do. That may be why this subject stays so strangely personal. Medieval bathing is not really about tubs and soap alone. It is about what people owe the body and what societies owe the people living inside those bodies. Comfort is never automatic. Privacy is never guaranteed. Clean water is never as ordinary as it feels when it arrives without thought. The basin by the hearth and the modern bathroom are separated by centuries, but they ask the same human question: how do we make life feel livable? Sometimes the answer is grand sewers, plumbing, hospitals, engineering, public health. Sometimes it is very small: a clean towel, a washed face before bed, fresh linen after illness, warm water for tired feet, a room that smells a little better than the street outside. History often survives in those small mercies. So the next time we imagine medieval life, perhaps we should picture less the dramatic castle and more the ordinary evening. Fire low in the hearth, a wooden bucket set down after real effort, someone wringing out a cloth, someone changing into the only clean shirt they have, someone deciding whether there is enough wood left for hot water tonight. That is where the truth usually lives. Not in the myth that people did not care, but in the reality that caring was expensive. And maybe that is why the past still feels close. Because beneath every century, every kingdom, every plague, and every changing theory of health, the body remains stubbornly the same. It wants warmth. It wants relief. It wants to feel presentable before other people. It wants, in the simplest possible sense, to be cared for. The medieval bath was never just about getting clean. It was about being human. And if that surprised you most, I'd love to know, what part of everyday medieval life feels hardest for you to imagine living through? And if you enjoy these quieter corners of history, stay with me. There are always more ordinary details from the past that turn out to be far stranger than the legends.